Hello everyone. This mini lecture is going to focus on international relations or IR theories. For the Boyer et al. Book, this is corresponding to chapter 2. When we're talking about theory or theoretical perspective about international relations and international politics, basically, we are asking a person, if I'm asking you which theory is closest to your belief system, I'm asking you, what is your worldview on global politics? What is it that you are thinking about the world? Is it a world of conflict and war? Is it a world of trade and cooperation? Is it a world that is defined by the different groups and identities in it? So for each one of those different ways to view the world, each one of those different lenses, there is a corresponding theory. And most of us might find ourselves close to a pure form of one theory or another, and other of us would find ourselves somewhere in between two or more theories. Now, you have to understand these are not prescriptions. This is not how things should be. It's just how I, or you in this case, see the world, how things are. Okay? Now, theories are based on studies and research that is partially normative. It's about values. It's about how do I conceptualize the world. And it also have an empirical part, which are the facts that I can then look at and say, I believe the world operates in a certain way because I can look at it and I can see some things happening. All of that hopefully will become much clearer in a few minutes. Now, if we are following a fully developed international relations theory, then we can do things like try to predict a pattern or try to predict what will happen in the future. And of course, this will have a level of error that is built into that. So in international politics or global politics, we can now talk about 5 major theories as listed over here. We have the realist theory, the liberal theory, world systems theory, constructivism, and a feminist theory. Now, some of those you probably heard about in different contexts too, but it is important to remember that each one of those theories have a specific kind of fine-tuning that fits international politics more than anything else that you could apply that theory for. And this is what I expect you to know and remember. Let's start with the realist theory. Realism mainly sees the world in terms of power and security. And the world, or how countries or units interact with each other, is a power struggle. Nation states are the most important actors for realism. Yes, there are other actors, such as international organizations or multinational corporations, but those are only as strong as nation states or countries let them be. Also, realists see the world in terms of a zero-sum game, meaning that if I win something, if I gain something, it means that somebody else lost. So there is no win-win situation. And because of that, the world operates in this survival of the fittest mode. I have to make sure that I'm strong enough and powerful enough, or have the right connections and relations to survive. And I'm the only one that can do it for myself, right? And that because each country, each actor think the same way, we end up in a competition or a struggle for power. When we're thinking about realism, we need to, or we can separate it into classical realism that comes from the writings and thought of Hobbes and Machiavelli. And here we are looking at individual behavior and seeing people are greedy and they want power and they're self-interested, and my self-interested come over everything else. And if I need to use force, if I need to use actual hard power, I will, and I should, right? And then in general, realist theory is pessimistic, and it's pessimistic not because it necessarily predicts war and chaos, not chaos at all, but war. It's pessimistic because it doesn't see the possibility for change or progress or that things will get better. The other kind of realism is neorealism or structural realism. And here we are not focusing on human nature and the fact that people are greedy and power hungry, but we are looking at the structure of the international system. And if you look at that, you can see that there is no central authority in international politics. There is no world government. There is no hierarchy. And this is unlike domestic politics. So in almost all or in all countries where there is a government, there is an entity, which would be the national government most times, that has an overarching power over everything that happens within that territory. We talked about it last week when we talked about sovereignty and nation states. We also have tools like police force and other law enforcement authorities, and many times some kind of a justice or a legal system that if I have a problem with somebody, I have an authority to call on to help me. But this is not the case in world politics. And because there is no world government, no world police, we are talking about the anarchic international system. We are saying that there is anarchy in international politics, but that anarchy does not mean chaos and everybody fighting each other all the time. All it means is that there is a lack of hierarchy. So in that system, with no world government, and where we have countries that care about their self-interest and survival, and they are rational actors, meaning that everything they do has a cost-benefit calculation to it, we end up again in a power struggle. Because I have to take care of myself. There is no authority that I can call on for help if I have any problem. Okay? And so I have to be strong enough to be able to survive. Now, if you further look into realism, you can talk about defensive realism, saying that we only want to be able to protect ourselves. For that cause, we may at times have to use violence, but we don't like to use violence, and we'll never use violence in order to take over others, just in order to protect myself. So that's why we call it defensive realism. And offensive realism, on the other hand, talks about nation states that are aggressive and violent and want more power, more resources. And in the name of this competition between countries, if I am an offensive realist, I believe that my country should be able to go ahead and grab and get everything, regardless of what it means to others. The other thing about realist theory is that it is not a moral theory. It sees things as they are. Interests, power, survival. There is no good and evil here. there is more and less powerful, larger and smaller, those who can and those who cannot, right? So when we're talking about realism, we are not talking about things like good versus evil or using force in order to protect the good. Those are not arguments that come from realist theory. On kind of almost the opposite side, we have liberal theory or IR liberalism. Okay? And liberalism does believe in progress, does believe in morality, and in cooperation and the importance of emotion. For many liberal IR theories, there is the possibility of a positive sum outcome, where there is a win-win situation that my country can gain and your country can gain, and we don't have to compete with each other, and it doesn't mean that somebody has to be on the losing end. And this is why IR liberalists are willing to accept the work of international organizations and multinational entities such as NGOs, saying that we are working multilaterally to promote joint principles and goals of humanity or of humankind, or this idea that we can all gain, we can all be on a projection trajectory, right? Now, neoliberalism still sees the idea that, still believe in the idea that we live in an anarchic world. There is still no world government, but from neoliberalism, we can build international, global, or world governance. And we talk about it in the next few weeks about exactly what the difference is. But mainly it's the idea that we can build mechanisms that, despite the fact that we don't have a world government and world police, we can still have a lot of cooperation and working together towards joint goals. And as you can imagine, those two world views are very, very different. If I believe that there is the possibility for change, for progress, for cooperation, I will conduct myself and my country in the world in very different way than if I believe that everybody are out to get me and I just need to be as powerful as I need in order to survive. A few more words about liberal theory, and we will see again later on in the semester. We are going to talk about the idea that economic cooperation can lead to even more closeness between countries, economic interdependence, because countries who do business together do not fight each other, right? This theory will be tested in the near future in the relationship between China and the United States, for example. We are talking about things like the role of international organizations. And again, that comes in the next few weeks also. And we will be talking about the importance of what kind of government do we have, an idea that is called the democratic peace theory, this idea that democracies do not go to war with other democracies. Another theory that's important to know is world system theory. And here the argument is that we shouldn't be focusing on countries, but we are talking about regions, and those are not necessarily geographic regions, but socioeconomic regions. And we're talking about the geopolitical global north, which is the developed countries, the richer countries, and the geopolitical global south, which is the underdeveloped and poor countries. And the idea is that the international institutions and organizations that were built, such as the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, again, all groups and institutions that we learn about later on in the semester, the idea or the argument of world system theory is that those institutions perpetuate the difference between the rich and the poor and doesn't provide for mobility between those groups. And so the rich will continue to be richer and the poor will continue to be poorer. World system theory is originating from Marxism and neo-Marxism. This is not exactly the same, but that is the same idea. It's a critical theory that looks at the world and explains whatever we see happening from the point of view of economic relations between the geopolitical North and the geopolitical South. Constructivism is a theory that centers on ideas and values and identities and the norms. So again, they're not arguing the fact that there is no world government, but they are saying that the fact that there is no world government doesn't mean that we need to be fighting each other, or doesn't mean that we have to create a world government in order to not fight each other. It's about our identities. And so the relationship between countries and between nations are kind of deeply built into the understanding of who we are and what we are. And so if we have countries that believe in human rights, then they can work together because they believe in the same idea. And if we are going to think of ourselves as victims, then we are going to behave as victims, etc., etc., etc. And so in constructivism, we see a relationship between the structure. We still don't have a world government. There's still no world police, still international anarchy. But there is also the possibility for change, but the change will come from us, from the people, from the agents, from leaders who decide to make a change, from leaders who decide to write new narratives and new stories, and maybe to work on changing the identities. So from an occupier, you can become a friend or a supporter, right? But that has to do with how one sees itself and how one sees other countries as well. This is the idea that individuals' behaviors are constructed, and they're constructed over time through the interactions between us and other countries. So the best example is that if we are going to encounter aliens, right, then we kind of start a relationship from zero. But if we're going to see them as friends or enemies, is not a given. Instead, it depends on how we are going to build the relationship between us and what kind of messages they are going to send us and we are going to send them from the very first moment. So if I'm going to come with guns and military to meet the aliens that come to visit because I see them as alien invasion, then I create a relationship of enemies. But if I come with gifts and flowers because I see them as friends, then arguably I create a relationship as well. And this is what constructivism is trying to bring to international relations. And then finally, we can think about the contribution of feminist theory. And this is where we are talking about different ways to understand those things that happen in the world, such as war and trade and diplomacy. And the argument is that if you come from a minority, in this case females, then you are going to see the situation differently than if you come from the those who are in power and who have stakes in the current power structure. Now, there are two ways to think about it, and the first one comes from liberal feminism, and here the point is that if we are going to add more women to the same system, then that could have an impact on decision making and how we are going to conduct ourselves as a country in the world, because women think differently or operate differently. On the other hand, critical feminism think that we need to change the way that we conceive the whole system. So we need to think differently about world politics, not just think the same and add females into the mix. So it's not a huge difference, but it matters, right? And here you have a picture of female world leaders that come from different countries, and you could see, if you zoom into it, you could see that there are other countries all around the world that have promoted women or elected women to the highest positions. As we know, still not happened in the United States, although we do have a female vice president right now. But the question that all of that brings in is, would women deal with situation differently, and will that change the world? If you're looking at the last couple of years and the COVID crisis, arguably some of the countries that dealt with the situation the best, such as New Zealand and Denmark, did have women in leadership. But of course, there's also examples of women leaders that did not deal well with the COVID crisis as well. And so I hope this very short overview of all those 5 theories gives you a good baseline as you go in and read and think and try to interact a little bit more with the material, and then also think, which one of those theories do you like the most or find yourself think alike the most, and which one of those you feel is mainly foreign to you.